Okay, hi everyone. My name's Ben Egliston and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Digital Media Research Centre at Queensland University of Technology. So as you might have been able to gather from the title and the clustering with the other papers in this session, this paper is about data analytics, that is the tools for the capture, visualization and analysis of data as they pertain to game development. This paper was very much a starting point for a broader research project that I'm now doing as part of my postdoc, looking at the use of data analytics tools by independent game developers in Australia. I'll just kind of note that games industry research, particularly that focused on production, is something that's relatively new to me. So any and all feedback is helpful. So as I said, this paper was a first stage in a project on data analytics in game development, and something that I started working on prior to my postdoc and prior to having the time and support to run an empirical study. In contrast to some existing work on the situated and idiosyncratic uses of data analytics in game development, such as that of Jennifer Whitson, this paper presents work from a qualitative discourse analysis of various forms of public-facing material to do with data analytics tools used for game development, particularly mobile game development. Drawing on the work of a range of scholarship in fields like science and technology studies, but more recently social sciences accounts of big data, such as that of David Beer or Rob Kitchen, I became interested in this idea of the data imaginary. Imaginary here is not taken in the common sense of something fictitious or made up, but rather refers to the kinds of symbolic, often collectively held visions that people have of a particular thing, such as technology, something existing on a discursive rather than a material register, or simply a material register. As a range of writers like Sheila Jasanoff have suggested, this imaginary is often constructed to shape how people collectively think about and use a certain technology, and often achieves this through things like advertising. As Jasanoff suggests, particularly relevant to an example like data analytics and game development, which certainly does exist today yet is far from the industry norm, the imaginary is typically orientated around discoursal narratives of the future of an emerging technology. Such visions typically privilege a desirable future, for example, social progress associated with the adoption of a particular kind of technology. But while future-oriented, as Jasanoff notes, the proliferation and success of new imaginaries is reliant on, quote, their fit with existing cultural norms and moral values, social structures and material infrastructure, political institutions and economic systems, and hopes and aspirations. Importantly, this process often takes place through the use of narratives, which help render imaginaries as intuitively recognizable, understandable, and relatable. The upshot of constructing technological imaginaries is a process with an explicitly political valence, attuned to questions of power, writes Jasanoff. The cultivation and proliferation of imaginaries often serves the interests of particular individuals or groups, and particular aims and logic, such as corporate interests in technology. In the present work, the goal of data analytics companies in creating exceedingly positive narratives about the promise of data analytics for game work is not a hard one to guess, to create a feeling that these tools are necessary and to ensure their spread. This benefits the companies providing these tools straightforwardly through things like paid subscriptions or through access to paid features, but also through the accumulation and monetization of user data. So in the ensuing analysis, I'm occupied with two main research questions. Firstly, what are the visions for a desirable mobile game development future that data analytics supposedly create? And secondly, what values, agencies, and identities get realized through such a future of game development? Doing so, I aim to understand how data-driven logics find themselves within game development, asking how they stabilize authority and credibility, and sell a coherent and positive vision of developing with data. So for this paper, I looked at 40 different examples of game development, game analytics rather, tools, largely used for mobile game development. These tools are generally sold as off-the-shelf analytics, things that can be relatively easily incorporated into developers' workflow, tools which purport to do away with the kinds of technical expertise required in collecting, analyzing, and making actionable big data. I identified four main kinds of data analytics tools, each with a distinct purpose: optimizing user engagement, optimizing advertising, optimizing distribution, and data brokerage or consultancy, so providing like reports on sort of data that's being collected. The table on the right summarizes some of the different metrics tracked by analytics software in this article or this paper sample. Some of the metrics include demographic info, such as location, hardware information, user engagement info, retention rate, information to do with advertising, such as the efficacy of user acquisition campaigns and so on. So in looking at these tools, I found that analytics were generally framed in terms of their affordance of security, prosperity, and convenience. Generally, these visions were predicated on the assumption that game development is an entrepreneurial activity, one where game development teams will constantly accumulate and work with data to improve the commercial viability of their game. There were 5 specific discourses about data that emerged in my analysis, which I explore in what follows. Firstly, data are granular and large in volume, easy to incorporate, something that builds games, something that profiles players, and something that lastly offers security. So, in imagining data as a means through which to create value through things like in-app purchases or advertising, data is taken to be big. Much in the same way that Rob Kitchen describes the epistemology of big data, the big here refers at once to the volume of data captured, but also the exhaustive scope of that data. As we see, companies like Game Analytics claim to have data from over 1.2 billion users. But scope and granularity is also key. Data can tell us a great deal about the specific ways that people are doing things with video games. Game Analytics stresses, for example, its 16,000 plus KPIs that it tracks, or its ability to tell you specific things about specific regional demographics. For instance, Game Analytics pays heavy attention to mobile game usage in China, which is clearly a financially lucrative market, suggesting that its detailed demographic data about Chinese users can benefit game developers. Further, a range of tools are framed as flexible in that they are interoperable, able to incorporate external data streams into their functioning, such as the mobile analytics of Mixpanel, being able to be integrated with other data sources to, quote, answer additional questions. Many mobile game analytics tools are framed as straightforward to incorporate. For example, Unity's analytics are, quote, simple but powerful, allowing users to visualize game data in one intuitive dashboard. Vumgle, a mobile advertising company commonly used for games with an analytics feature, these tools are beneficial from, quote, indie studios to powerhouse brands. Generally, data were presented in the format of accessible dashboards, offering all relevant data streamlined into one convenient place. Things that present data in pre-rendered, easy to parse spark lines, bar graphs, and so on and so forth. One can supposedly easily gaze over the vast amount of data collected and visualized. Notably, as seen in the Game of Wales software, these tools are easy to incorporate, or so easy to incorporate that you'll be able to, quote, cut out the roles of data scientists and product design teams. But of course, what is left out here is any attention to the kind of literacy and time involved in actually using these tools, which, for instance, as Jennifer Whitson has pointed out, are potentially significant. As Whitson notes, data capture, cleaning, processing, and analysis are things that may introduce new forms of labor, something particularly problematic amidst widely reported crunch in the games industry. This, of course, is particularly concerning as well, given the focus of these kinds of tools on data-driven iterative design, of constantly updating in response to a never-ending stream of data. Data is framed as something that builds games, as an important, if not necessary, part of producing engaging and commercially successful mobile games. Many examples use the phrasing of building, signifying data as a kind of foundational component of successful games. Of course, what is assumed here is that successful games are financially successful games, success largely achieved on the basis of in-app monetization mechanisms and largely advertising. For tools like IronSource, the focus is really on building successful in-game ad campaigns rather than games at all. In the sample, any focus on the relationship between data and creative imperatives to do with game development were uncommon. One example referenced data as a way to free up capacity to focus on the creative aspects of game development, but generally analytics are presented positively as things allowing us to maximize the profit derived from users' data, allowing game developers to anticipate the most profitable next move through data. So data profiles players, it targets players. Given that advertising material tended to conflate game development with freemium game development, data analytics tools tended to place heavy emphasis on the ability to profile and target or segment players, particularly as a means to further extract revenue. We see this through software like Game of Whales, used to identify the users who spend large amounts of money on in-app purchases, doing so through the smart sounding yet often vague invocation of the use of AI, or through Simple's analysis of, quote, millions of user profiles. Elsewhere, there's a kind of invocation of quasi-scientific language, a common technique in marketing data analytics, such as that of a methodology or conducting a longitudinal study, as to lend a feeling of legitimacy to these kinds of tools. In short, game development is framed as knowing how best to segment and monitor the player base. Lastly, data was presented as something that offers security. It was presented as something that could mitigate against failure by virtue of its veracity, scale, ease of use, and so on. As the iron source material reads, quote, with our tool, you can roll out new ad features and minimize the risk involved. Elsewhere, data is presented as a way to negotiate the precarious conditions of platformization, particularly app store models of distribution. Quote, as independent game designers, we generally want to focus on creating games. On a market where hundreds of titles are released each day, we cannot just rely on our game's quality to magically attract users. In this way, App Store analytics then might be seen as a way to navigate what Dieter and colleagues call the unique affordances, built-in logics, and mechanisms of app stores. But beyond offering a way to subsist within what David Nieborg and Thomas Pohl call the platformization of cultural production, they also emphasize a mode of economic subsistence within what Max Haven calls the financialization of cultural production. Put simply, how cultural producers access money. Specific reference in these tools is often to venture capital, these KPIs and metrics offering a way to secure funding from VC firms. So this talk is aimed to explore some of the discourses commonly used to frame data analytics tools that are used in game development. As I've shown, these are overwhelmingly techno-solutionist in nature and typically focus on the commercial dimensions of game development. One of my further goals with this work, going to do interviews with game developers in 2021, is to explore the extent to which these imaginaries inform game developers' own perceptions of game development, and in so doing, exploring the extent to which these imaginaries actually operate as things that press upon life and how people think and act. And that's me. Thanks.